For the past 6 weeks, I've lived with two smartwatches strapped to my wrist, the Apple Watch Ultra and the Garmin Epix 2nd generation. Here's what I learned. Now, before I dive in, a couple of notes. If you have an Android phone, don't bother with any Apple Watch. Second, here's what I use them for. Hiking in the mountains, cycling on roads and trails, going to the gym, getting notifications, playing music. I also have an office job, which is where I spend the majority of my week. I'm mostly an Apple guy, except my fitness and outdoor gear. That's all Garmin. I'm already part of each ecosystem to a point. The watches just kind of integrate both. That brings me to integration, and I'll start with Apple on this one. You pretty much need an iPhone to use the Apple Watch, any Apple Watch, but beyond that, it also integrates with the rest of your Apple ecosystem. If you're wearing the watch, it'll automatically log you into your Mac. You can also use it as a remote control for your Apple TV. It has Find My, which I use way too much if you have Apple Music. You can also load music there, although I actually had a much easier time with Spotify. Speaking of which, the Apple Watch Ultra comes with 32 gigabytes of internal storage, which is the same as all current Apple Watch models. The Apple Watch will allow you to control any media playing on your phone. Plus, you can make phone calls, write text messages, and all the focus modes that you set up on your phone are automatically available on your watch. Meanwhile, the Garmin experience is far more limited on this front. Mind you, smartwatch features alone aren't why you consider a $1,000 Garmin watch. When it comes to audio apps, you have fewer options. Spotify, Deezer, and Amazon Music are the biggest ones, and they let you download music to your watch. Can't really stream from your watch though. Depending on the Garmin model that you pick up, you might either have 16 gigabytes of space or 32 gigabytes of space. The Sapphire model will be the one with more space. Now note that the Android experience with Garmin is much better since there's a lot of stuff that Apple doesn't let Garmin do, like reply to text messages. You can still get text messages and notifications from other apps, but the control here is far more limited. But Epix does have a card up its sleeve, and that's the Garmin ecosystem. I use the Garmin bike computer, the Edge 1030. I use a cadence sensor, a Varia radar. I use lights. I use a heart rate monitor that's made by Garmin, and I also use the inReach Mini 2 when I'm hiking. During activities, I can see their information on the screen clearly, and in some cases I can control them. One big advantage that Garmin has is that their watches support not just Bluetooth but also ANC Plus or ANT Plus, which is used by a lot of fitness devices. The Apple Watch doesn't have ANC Plus, and while that should be fine for most people because most devices will have Bluetooth, it may limit your device options. The Apple Watch Ultra keeps the same design language found in the iPhone, which means that most users will be used to it right away. This isn't always great, but it is familiar. Still, the interface itself is fantastic for using it at home or at the office, maybe even the gym. But if you're wearing gloves or if you're doing something that requires a lot of attention, it's sometimes hit or miss. Here's an example. Whenever I'm cycling, a lot of the time I'm wearing gloves. Even under the best conditions, gloves don't do well with touchscreens because you can't be precise. Not just that, but using the crown itself with gloves, it's not a good experience. At worst, it's outright dangerous. And in my case, it keeps rubbing on my skin, making it hard to turn. All these issues are resolved by one thing: buttons. It's a big reason Apple added the action button. And while that's absolutely great, there are issues with it, like accidentally activating at times, which is something that I do way too often. This was a great addition, mind you, but it still doesn't feel like Apple quite knows what to do with it yet. Meanwhile, with Garmin, right now, this is perfect for this kind of activity. The Epix has 5 buttons. It also has a touchscreen, but literally everything can be done using the buttons. When I'm wearing gloves, I don't want to have to fiddle with a touchscreen and with buttons. Most of the time, I can at least rely on muscle memory to control the watch. And in fact, you can actually turn off the touchscreen on a per activity basis. Meanwhile, with Apple, you need to use the touchscreen. Both watches have OLED screens, so they're sharp and clear. The Ultra has a 410 by 502 resolution screen, while the Epix has a 416 by 416 resolution. The Garmin screen is also 1000 nits versus the Ultra's 2000 nit screen. I've never really had an issue with either outdoors, but the difference is noticeable. The Ultra is brighter. The only time screen brightness has actually been an issue has been with the flashlight. The flashlight on the Epix isn't anywhere nearly as bright as on the Apple Watch Ultra, but it does have levels, which I found nice to have. The Apple Watch Ultra has one level, bright, and they do both go red. I do like Garmin's implementation of this a bit better. Double tap on one of the buttons and the flashlight automatically turns on. Meanwhile, with the Apple Watch, you have to dig into the menu to turn on the flashlight, unless, of course, you do what I did, and that is map the flashlight to the action button. By the way, if you're finding this useful, please consider giving this video a like. And if you want more of this type of content, subscribe and let me know in the comments below. If you already have, thank you. Now, Apple did waste a few opportunities when it came to the Apple Watch's interface. For example, there are 2 ways to switch watch faces from the home screen: press and hold, and then swipe. Why not just use swipe to do something else, like showing you a list of widgets like what Garmin has. Notifications are fine, but widgets would make this thing an information powerhouse. Right now, the best you have is complications, which you can't really have that many of, and they don't really provide all that much information. Also, going through the apps list can be a nightmare. There are so many apps. I wish I could hide a few or at least organize my menu in some way. With Garmin, you can hide the apps you don't use as often, which is great, and you can organize the menu. So while the Apple Watch definitely has a smoother interface, the Epix has a more focused, well-tuned experience overall. Now let's take a look at the battery life. The Apple Watch Ultra promises 36 hours of battery life, and they do good on that. In fact, you'll get more than that. I've gotten about 48. It'll give you about 2 full days in my tests with regular use. That includes exercise, for example. The battery saving mode is supposed to extend this to 60 hours, but if you're using it full force, GPS tracking, streaming music, using it as a phone, the time goes down precipitously, down to about 8 or 9 hours. The Garmin Epix 2 by default will give you about 6 days of use. If you're playing a lot of music on it and using the different GPS modes and you have your sensors on, you're looking at much less time than that, between 8 and 16 hours. Of course, if you're using the power saving modes, you can stretch that out to almost 6 weeks. One thing I do want to call out though is the convenience of charging. Apple watches all charge wirelessly. Garmin, on the other hand, uses a proprietary plug. With the Epix, I've been having an issue where the plug wiggles a little bit too much, and sometimes, even though I've plugged it in, it won't charge. When it comes to sensors, both have heart rate sensors, blood oxygen sensors, and altimeters. The Apple Watch also includes a skin temperature sensor and a 1-lead electrocardiogram. They can both detect abnormal heart rhythms. One thing I really like about Garmin is that they have an altitude acclimation feature. It lets you know whether you're acclimated to a particular altitude. But the question is accuracy. Both are pretty good, but they don't always align. For example, I was riding my bike recently and my heart rate was registering at 168 beats per minute. That's according to a chest strap monitor that I had. The Epix was putting me at about 171 to 175. Meanwhile, the Apple Watch had me between 160 and 164. When I looked at the analyses later on, they all lined up, but during the activity itself, they definitely had some disparity. And that usually is the case. Apple tends to run a little bit low, Garmin tends to run a little bit high. This only really happened during extremes. Still, all three devices lined up pretty well most of the time. Now, training is a huge differentiator. It's where Garmin really shines. Mind you, Apple can shine too, with a little bit of extra help. The Apple Watch's basic apps are fine, but not great. The thing is, pretty much all of these apps require that you use the app on the phone itself to be completely useful. Overall, Garmin is better here. You get a ton of data just on the watch itself. The thing that Garmin does is that they actually analyze your data to see whether there are certain days you take fewer steps on a regular basis, or whether you're stressed, or whether you're ready to work out. And when it comes to the gym, it has training plans, it shows you samples of exercises, it counts reps, and Garmin doesn't charge you extra for any of this. You can get some of this functionality with the Apple Watch, but it will cost you. For example, to get my trends and training readiness, I use Athletic, which is $32 a year. Then for my training routine, I have Fitbod, which is $80 a year. For mapping my hikes and my bike rides, I use Work Outdoors, which is $6. And for notices about my stress levels, I use Stress Monitor by Active Ace, which is $50 a year. You get the point. It can get pretty pricey. In the Apple Watch, all of this integrates with Apple's Health app. If you get a Garmin watch, you'll be able to integrate this information in there too. So if you use a Garmin watch with other devices, you'll still be able to pull that information into one place. Mind you, it's a one-way street. Garmin shares information with Apple Health, but Apple Health does not share information with Garmin. There is something I do want to go ahead and gripe about, and that is mapping. Let's start with the Apple Watch Ultra. One of the great features that the Apple Watch gives you is turn-by-turn directions using the Apple Maps feature. Just plug in the address into Apple Maps on your phone and you get the turn-by-turn directions in your watch, including the map. Meanwhile, none of their fitness features, not hiking, not cycling, or not running, have maps included. And Garmin isn't any better. Garmin already has fantastic maps included with the watch for your entire continent. If you're already on the trail, you can get turn-by-turn directions to get to your destination, including making maps on the fly. But for some reason, Garmin watches don't have directions for the road when you're driving somewhere. They should bridge this gap. It'd be wonderful. Both of these watches are designed to stay on your wrist for days, including wearing them to bed. Starting with Apple, the watch will remind you about your bedtime and give you a heads up a few minutes before so you can start preparing for bed. In the morning, if you set it up in the Health app, the watch will wake you up by vibrating and playing your alarm softly, then increasing the volume. Honestly, this is a really great implementation of this, and it's a pleasure to wake up to. Garmin watches aren't as well tuned here, but they do have some nice features. My favorite feature is actually the morning report. It takes a few weeks of wearing it to sleep for it to show up, but once it does, it gives you a full update into things like how well you slept or your overall training readiness. It's just pulling all this information together and presenting it in the morning and getting you ready for the day. Fantastic. Both watches use sensors throughout the night, so you can see if anything interesting happened. Apple has a better sleep analytics, but Garmin presents the information way better since you can actually see a lot of this information in the watch itself. With the Ultra, you need to go into the Apple Health app, dig around in there, and find that information. So here's my take. The Apple Watch Ultra is a fantastic smartwatch that's trying to become a better sports watch. The Garmin Epix is a fantastic smart sports watch that's trying to do better about being a general purpose watch. The Apple Watch Ultra can do a lot of things that I haven't even touched on here, like make phone calls, play videos, detect car crashes, the texting, controlling my camera, connect to Siri, and adding a calendar event with my voice. So no, this wasn't entirely a fair test because I only really tested the areas where they compete. It's up to you to decide whether the other capabilities matter to you. Both are expensive. The Apple Watch Ultra is $800, while the Garmin Epix is either $900 or $1,000 depending on the model that you pick. On its face, the budget option between these two is surprisingly the Apple Watch Ultra, even though it has more features. The Ultra stops being the budget option once you start adding app subscriptions so you can get what Garmin gives you out of the box. The thing with the Garmin Epix though is that it does something for me that the Apple Watch doesn't. Because it's so focused on being a fitness device, it actually inspires me to go out and work out. The Apple Watch Ultra is a fantastic smartwatch, arguably the best in the market today. It does not hold a candle to the Garmin Epix in the gym or outdoors. And if you want to watch primarily for that, and you're not 100% in love with the Apple ecosystem, then this isn't even a competition. Get the Garmin. This is arguably the perfect fitness watch. Thing is, the Apple Watch Ultra may be the best lifestyle watch. The temptation for me is to keep both, one for fitness and one for the rest of life. If budget isn't an issue, go hog wild, get both. For now, I'm sticking with the Ultra and I'll let my trainer be my motivation. Now, I thought about doing the Apple Series 7 and the Garmin Forerunner 955, and the combined cost of those is about the cost of an Apple Watch Ultra or maybe the Epix, right around that range. But I've covered in another video why I don't go that route. So go ahead and click and watch. And be sure to click subscribe and drop a comment below if you want to see more content like this. With that, see you next time.